I recently asked members of my private community what they would like me to talk about on the channel. We had some amazing suggestions. One of them in particular stood out from the rest because it resonated with so many people. It comes from Denise, who writes, "How can I, a family member, encourage someone to get help and medication?" So today on Polar Warriors, I'm going to talk about 10 ways you might help a loved one in denial of their bipolar illness. To keep expectations realistic, this is a really hard topic without a universal or easy answer. Sometimes your loved one can be so consumed by the illness that there isn't any room for anyone or anything else. It's horrible. It's like the person you love is temporarily gone and you're talking to this monster of an illness instead. You can't reason with bipolar disorder. Sometimes you have to rely on outside intervention, up to and including hospitalization, to make any difference. The tips I have are going to require some timing, love, and a lot of patience to be effective. If you have any tips of your own or would like to share what's going on with your loved one, please join the conversation down in the comments. Before I jump into the tips, I need to provide a little context. Typical denial is where a person rejects or avoids accepting reality because it's unpleasant or distressing. People with trauma, grief, substance use disorders, and personality disorders commonly experience typical denial. Then there's a medical condition known as anosognosia, where someone can't see the problem at all. Since people with this condition can't recognize they have a medical problem, there's no sense of urgency to care for it. Experts commonly describe it as a denial of deficit or a lack of insight about one's own condition. It's estimated that 40% of people with bipolar disorder experience this intense condition. In this video, though, I'm going to focus on typical denial. I'll be making an additional video discussing anosognosia at a later time, as it isn't technically a form of denial. So why are so many people in denial? According to psychotherapist Mavish Sikander, sometimes people need denial because facing a traumatic event is too painful to deal with. It's like the brain's way of protecting itself from an emotional overload, blocking a reality that's too shocking to process. Denial serves as a self-defense mechanism for many people. In addition to helping people avoid distress, defense mechanisms give people a sense that they're coping better. Denial can give someone a sense of control over something that feels very out of control. And bipolar disorder can make us feel very out of control. Now that I've provided a little context, let's jump into the tips. My first tip is probably the most important. You've heard the expression about everything having a time and a place. Well, timing and location can make or break a conversation with a loved one about bipolar disorder. I know many of you have a burning sense of urgency to address the situation, especially if the person is out of control. But if the timing isn't right, it could just make things worse. So when's the best timing? For me personally, there's this tiny window when I'm more emotionally open. It's when I'm just starting to come down from mania and starting to experience slight depression. I might start saying things like, "I'm tired of feeling like this," or "maybe I'll go see a doctor." If I'm manic, it's very hard to see that there's a problem. But if I'm too depressed, I might shut down completely. I need to be fairly stable emotionally, not too manic, not too depressed. The right timing can increase the chances of people reaching me, but it's not a guarantee, so keep your expectations realistic. Just as important as timing is location. A crowded restaurant with tables all jammed together isn't a good place to bring up the topic of bipolar disorder. You want to make sure you have privacy and no distractions. Your loved one should be in a setting where they feel comfortable and safe. I'm way more approachable when I'm not distracted or overstimulated. My next tip is to know what you're dealing with. Do your research and learn about bipolar disorder. If you hope to make a difference, you'll need to demonstrate your knowledge of the illness. If you don't know what dysphoric mania or triggers are, it's time to really dig into what bipolar disorder is. The more you know, the easier it will be to identify symptoms and share them with your loved one. It will also help you to not take things quite so personally. My YouTube channel is the largest in the world dedicated to bipolar disorder. If you're new to all of this, Polar Warriors is a great place to start. My third tip is to discuss bipolar disorder without blaming your loved one. Do this by practicing I statements. If you keep saying you, it could sound accusatory to people in denial. I statements can help you state your concerns, needs, and feelings in a way that's easier for the listener to hear and comprehend. Two great examples of I statements start with the words I feel and I need. They focus on your own feelings and experiences. If you can express the way you feel without blaming, criticizing, or attacking, your loved one will be less likely to put up a wall and shut down. I statements are about being clear and easily understood. Simply state how things look from your perspective in a calm, matter-of-fact way. Instead of saying, "You always spend so much money on non-essentials that our bills aren't getting paid," say, "I feel worried when our bills and savings aren't getting paid first," or "I need to know our bills and savings are taken care of first with our paychecks." You're being clear about the problem without blaming or causing your loved one to feel defensive. It might also help if you write down what you'd like to say and practice it, especially if you're not accustomed to using I statements. Moving on to the fourth tip. This one comes from Timothy Yen, a psychologist in Dublin, California, who encourages us to look at the situation from a new perspective. He points out that there are two hidden benefits for people living in denial. First, denial shows that the person still has some fighting spirit left in them. This means that change is possible. Second, this person also has a desire for self-preservation. They want to keep living, but in a better way. Our brain is completely wired for survival and does everything it can to keep us alive. Dr. Yen states that if the distressing situation is going to cause pain, the brain will find creative ways to keep those kinds of experiences away from the individual. Changing the way we see the difficult situation our loved one is in can help us to cultivate more compassion. Now for number 5. Address the emotions behind the words that your loved one is using. When someone is yelling and saying nasty, hurtful things, it's extremely hard to not react. When someone spits in my face, I want to punch them back. It's almost instinct. Instead of reacting to what your loved one is saying, ask yourself, what are the emotions behind the words? Your loved one is probably scared, in fight or flight mode, and emotionally panicking. I've been there many times. If I'm in angry denial and someone asks me what my problem is, watch out. However, if someone said, "I can see you're hurting and angry about the situation. That must be really hard and I'm sorry you feel that way," it would instantly soften me. Try to see your loved one as someone who is greatly suffering inside, has no idea why, and whose brain is scrambling to try and make sense of it all. The more upset the person is, the more they're hurting inside. Address the hurt behind the words, not the words that they're saying. This is way easier said than done, but it can make a huge difference. My 6th tip is to offer to do some legwork. When I'm crippled by the paralysis of catatonic depression, it can feel extremely overwhelming to find a therapist or call for a doctor's appointment. Applying for benefits like disability would be even harder. If you're comfortable with it, offer to help with some of these things. Money is a very common excuse people use to avoid seeing a doctor. Fortunately, a lot of therapists offer a sliding scale where they'll give a discount to people with financial struggles. There is also some great online directories and services that'll match you with a therapist who specializes in bipolar disorder. BetterHelp.com is just one example. Let's move on to tip number 7. Present your loved one with some black and white facts when the timing is right. Grab one of those 30-day wall calendars and start tracking their daily mood. Put a smiley face, a neutral face, or a frowny face on each day to reflect your loved one's mood. At the end of the month, add up how many days were good and how many days were bad. If they're having more bad days than good days, you can gently point this out. You could say something like, "I noticed that you struggled more than half of the days in this last month. Can we both work together to try and improve your quality of life?" For me personally, it was a huge wake-up call to realize I was suffering more than I was enjoying life. Bipolar disorder can be really deceiving like that. I might feel like I was fine last month when I'd actually spent over half the days in a symptomatic state. Part of the illness is not knowing that we're ill. It helps to have a loving, objective observer point out the truth. Now for tip number 8, challenge the stigmas associated with bipolar disorder. Unfortunately, there are still a lot of cultural taboos surrounding mental illness, especially with older generations. This can cause many people to avoid seeking help. I remember I used to feel flawed, ashamed, and less than other people because there was something different about me. Sometimes I still feel like this. But if I'm reminded of the accomplishments I've achieved over the years, I remember that I'm a capable person. When I'm dragging, it helps to remember that I started this YouTube channel or ran several successful karate schools. This helps me realize that I am creative, empathetic, capable, and more resilient than many people. Reminding you and your loved one of their redeeming qualities may serve as a way to break down some of the stigmas. Tip number 9. Decide on some boundaries if your loved one continues to refuse help. There may come a time where the denial starts doing more harm than good. Maybe you've tried all of the things in this video and nothing will work. So what then? Does the relationship end or does it continue? Will you ask them to move out? Will you still be friends with them and keep in contact? These are questions I can't answer for you. Take your time answering them. Don't make a life-altering decision out of haste or in the heat of an emotional exchange. I clearly remember the day my current partner said, "Rob, if you don't change some things, I don't think I can continue this relationship." It saddens me to think that things got that bad, but they did. It took the prospect of losing someone I care deeply about for me to take the situation seriously. Here's the most important part. You have to be fully committed to your course of action. If you set a boundary and you go back on your word even once, your loved one will learn that with enough resistance, they can manipulate you into foregoing your boundaries. They will continue to stay in denial like I did until the relationship erodes. We've made it to the last tip I'm going to share today, number 10. Know when it's time to ask for professional help. And by professional help, I mean a psychiatrist or a hospital, not just your family doctor. 40% of people with bipolar disorder are misdiagnosed. I was misdiagnosed in my 20s with a depressive disorder by a general practitioner. I was put on a standard antidepressant which made the mania 10 times worse. Everything starts with a proper diagnosis. I was correctly diagnosed years later with type 1 bipolar disorder after a hospital visit. Speaking of hospitalizations, if your loved one gets violent, self-harms, threatens suicide, or becomes severely delusional, it's time to get them to a hospital, by any means necessary. Calling 911 or having them taken against their will might be the hardest thing you've ever had to do. They might even be really angry with you. Just remember, 1 in 5 people do not survive this illness. That's right, a 20% suicide rate. While it's best to get evaluated and treated by a competent psychiatrist from the very start, it's even more crucial to get professional help the moment the illness becomes unmanageable. We've made it through a tremendous amount of information today on Polar Warriors. If you have to watch this video again and take some notes, go for it. Maybe share the video with friends or family to start building a team of educated supporters. If your loved one isn't ready to accept help, don't let them hold you up. Build your own support team. This illness can be so consuming, and you can't take care of others if you don't take care of yourself. You can't take care of others if you don't take care of yourself. That said, take extra good care of yourselves, and I'll be back here soon with more Polar Warrior videos. Stay well.